And it so stirred me that afterwards I had to pull him to the side and I said, listen, I said, now my heart got really giddy when you said that. I said, because the Lord called me to Alabama. Actually, another thing about the Kim Clement prophecy, when was he sharing that prophecy? Like, what date was he given that? What was the night? It was New Year's Eve night of 2010 going into 2011. I was in Kansas City during that time, and it was New Year's Eve night, 2010. We're about to come into 2011 that the Lord spoke to me and said, get your house in order. You're fixing to go to Montgomery, Alabama. There's something about the number 111, 11, 11 that has to do with our state, and it's a prophetic storyline that God is weaving, has been weaving probably for some time. I just happen to, and others just happen to, just get to jump in and swim around a little bit. Alabama is the 22nd state in our union. That's how you get 11 plus 11 equals 22. It's absolutely, I could write a book just listing hundreds and hundreds of times that the Lord has highlighted those numbers as it relates to Alabama. But the reason that I brought this is because when Alan gave that word, and he shared it afterwards, he said, yes, that is exactly what the Lord told me. I was just like, this is wild. I was at a Bible study a few weeks later. It was a women's Bible study, and they just invited me to come be a part. And so I said, okay. And I was like the only guy there, except when I brought my friends. That I was like, sure. It was at an Episcopal church, and they were doing a what's Bill Johnson's wife's name?
Benny.
Benny.
Huh?
Benny Johnson.
Benny? Yeah. So we were at an Episcopal church doing a Benny Johnson Bible study. And I thought that was pretty cool, so I had to check it out. But anyway, we were doing a little study on the weapons of warfare. And as we were leaving, the lady that was heading up the Bible study, she said, the Lord told me that you need to have this. And I was like, he said, you know what it means. And I said, you have no idea what that means. Because in the back of my mind, I was hearing that word again, that Alabama is the tip of the spear unto awakening in this nation that God is going to bring about. And so many times in so many places I go, I see things that look like the tip of a spear. The very capital of our nation sits on a piece of property, and the way that the streets run into it at an angle make it look like it would be the head of an arrow point, like the tip of a spear. Sidney Jacobs spoke a prophetic word down in Florida at Christian International. It just came on her one time. And she said that God was going to use Alabama, and specifically the courts in Alabama, to overthrow the judicial tyranny that the federal courts in America have been imposing upon the people of America. She didn't know it at the time, but there was one of our Supreme Court justices that just actually happened to be in the audience at the time. And another Supreme Court justice, when I went to see him one day, I had brought this arrow up there. I just felt like I should. And when I walked in his office, he was sitting down and he was whittling his fingernails with his pocket knife. And we started talking, and I was sharing that prophetic word with him from Sidney Jacobs. He actually had heard it before as well. But he asked me if he could borrow my arrow. And I said, sure. Now, the point is pretty sharp right now. When it was given to me, it was not. And the Lord spoke to me through that and said, though the tip of this arrow may seem dull at the time, it's been through a lot, it's kind of worn out, but it still has a purpose. It just needs to be resharpened. And the Lord spoke to me about the church in our state being resharpened like a finely tuned arrow point that will be very effective in accomplishing its task once it's sharpened. And so this Supreme Court justice in the Alabama State Supreme Court started whittling on this arrow. And when he got done with it, he just looked up at me and he said, Andy, he said, here's to the end of judicial tyranny in America and the coming revival that God is going to bring to our nation. And so I carry this arrow around with me from time to time, just as a symbol. And God has spoken so many times in so many ways. Our very name, Alabama, comes from a Choctaw Indian name, which means thicket clearer, or one who prepares the way. Right? It is the tip of a spear. It is a forerunner destiny that we have upon our states. When we were in D.C., we were praying at the Supreme Court. We didn't know. We were praying for some decisions that were before the court. All right? And how many of you guys know that in our current culture, if we're going to affect change in this nation, we're going to affect our government. Right? Because for all of the ways that our founding fathers established an incredible system of government for us, it has been hijacked by those who have plans that are not from the Lord to use our very government against us. But God's going to do a reversal in that. And we're already seeing that in this current administration. When we were in D.C., we were praying in the Supreme Court. We prayed often for our judges and justices. The Monday after we were there for that week, the Supreme Court releases the decision. I don't know if you guys heard it, but it was a 7-2 decision, which is kind of unheard of when it comes to controversial issues. It was regarding the cake baker that said he would not bake a cake for the same-sex couple that he was friends with, that he loved for, cared for, and cooked for them many times, but just said, I can't do this one thing. And they took it to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court said in a 7-2 decision, which was incredible, that this baker has the religious liberty to say no. And I mean, I can't help but think that came on the tail end of these guys and others from around the state of Alabama worshiping and praying and crying out to the Lord for a week, right around the corner from that Supreme Court, that Alabama was a tip in God's arrow, the spear, to affect change in our nation. That decision, huge decision. And the very fact that it wasn't a 5-4 or something like that is absolutely incredible. And so that's just the beginning of the beginning. And I really believe that God is going to use our state. I mean, other people in other states, they all have a purpose. But one of the things that I believe that is a part of God's purpose in the state of Alabama has to do with Appomattox. It has to do with the Azusa Street. I don't know if how many of you guys know that there were some real issues with racism and stuff like that in California at the time. And one of the quotes coming out of Azusa Street said that the issues of racism have been washed away in the blood of the Lamb through Azusa Street. Alabama has a history of issues with racism, division, walls of separation, envy, divisiveness, all those kind of things. But I believe that one of our destinies is to lead the nation in modeling what it looks like Jesus prayed for in John 17, to love one another, to care for one another, to prefer one another. And that's where I kind of want to go to just for a minute and talk about the Tabernacle of David. Most of you guys, maybe you are not familiar with the Tabernacle of David, but David basically was summoned by the Lord to establish this place of rest for the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the presence of the Lord, because wherever the Ark of the Covenant went, there was incredible blessing and favor and just beyond our measure of imagination, just incredible things taking place. And David established this tent actually kind of right in his own backyard. When AJ was asking me, what I thought about this place when I came in, I said, well, the very first thing that came to me was, David established the tabernacle right in his own backyard. And I said, you kind of already jumped on that. It's true. I don't want to play that off like it's not what it is. I mean, this is a very special place. And obviously, this is my first time here, but what happens in this place is of incredible significance in what God's doing in our state and even unto affecting change in our nation. So I encourage you not to ever take it for granted. I encourage you to give it all you got every time you're here. Just go hard. Don't look around. Don't be concerned about what others are thinking or saying or doing.
Yeah.
But just go after God with all your heart. That's what David did. David actually employed, with his own personal finances, thousands of singers and musicians to do one thing, and that was to minister before the Lord day and night. And when I said earlier that what happened tonight during worship touched my heart in a deeper place than any teaching or preaching ever could, I really meant that. Because David stumbled onto something that God said in the book of Amos, on the Old Testament, as well as in the book of Acts, that at the end of the age, he was going to reestablish the tabernacle of David, that he was going to rebuild its broken walls. And one of the very next things that he says after that is that the Jews and the Gentiles are going to come together. We talk a lot, especially in Alabama, about unity and all that kind of stuff. But how many of you guys know that the greatest picture of unity that God can ever paint is the coming together of that one new man in Jew and Gentile? And that's a part of the tent ministry that David established. People were drawn. All they had to do was just lift up the curtains, and people were drawn in just to the music, to the worship. They were drawn in, and God just encountered them there. When we were in D.C., we had story after story that all these guys could share with you. People just coming up because they heard music. Whether it was a family that was broken and needed healing, whether it was one of Trump's kind of inner circle guys that's just out jogging and comes in just to worship the Lord for a little bit, whether it's a couple traveling from France that they're like, we have nothing like this in our country. We came to D.C. and this is the highlight of our trip, to have a place where people are just gathering together to worship the Lord day and night. People coming from different churches, just all the stories that we could all share. A lady that came from the court that is handling all the Hillary Clinton email scandals, all those lawsuits against Trump, all that stuff. One of the assistants to the judge there, one of the judges, came over just to worship, just to pray. And God put this question in my heart: why in the world would we plant a tent? Why would David plant a tent in his own backyard and just have people go and just worship the Lord? Because people's lives are changed just in the very presence of the Lord. Nobody has to preach to them. Nobody has to lead them in a sinner's prayer. Nobody has to do anything unless the Lord leads them to add to what He is already doing, to partner with Him. Because the presence of the Lord can change even the most desperate situation in an instant.
Yes.
More than any teaching or preaching ever could. More than any deliverance session ever could. In a moment, just the very presence of God can change a heart, can bring healing to a broken place, can bring deliverance where there's need.